know. It might well be that when you are around 12 and you're a boy, especially if you're, temperamentally inclined to some degree to be challenging, that's exactly the right time for you to have a father who can step on you around. I know that there's some evidence among elephants.
None of you know this, but I'm actually going to be a father.
Everybody knows, we all know already. Nobody fucking talk about something else. Please shut the fuck up.
I'm about to become a dad, and I didn't really have a dad growing up, so I've been thinking a lot about what being a good dad means. That is the subject of this. In my last video, I briefly brought up the Netflix show Adolescence and the controversy surrounding its release. Those sections were copyright struck because Netflix is a very annoying company.
Jamie Miller.
What's going on?
The time is 6:15 a.m. and I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder.
Adolescence is a story about a young boy being arrested following the assault and killing of a young girl from his school. Across 4 episodes, it explores several different aspects of the case. If I had to summarize it quickly, I'd say the first episode deals mainly with our expectations of the profile of violent criminals and criminal behavior. It's the only episode where we don't already know that Jamie, the boy the show is centered around, definitely did commit the crimes. This allows the audience to experience the situation from the same emotional perspective as the parents. First, outrage and indignance at this obvious misunderstanding.
He's a good kid, yeah? And I'm a good dad.
And then shock at the realization that this meek 13-year-old boy did in fact commit a brutal murder. I think there's a clear point being made by the show that Jamie does not fit stereotypical media expectations of criminality. Jamie is not intimidating, and everything in his character and demeanor feel completely at odds with the kind of people we're usually taught to be afraid of. The second episode explores Jamie's school life, particularly revelations both that Jamie was deeply entrenched in the right-wing manosphere online.
It's an exploding red pill. Pills, the blue pills means you see the world as it wants you to.
That's from the Matrix. You've been watching the Matrix?
What?
And was also seemingly a victim of bullying himself leading up to his actions.
That's what they say, you're an incel. You're gonna be, I don't know, a virgin forever, basically. And all those people have fired, which means they're agreeing with her.
The third is a session between Jamie and a forensic psychologist, the direct attempt to understand Jamie on a deeper level to better help the courts judge his mental capacity. The final episode moves away from Jamie and instead studies the behaviors of his family 1 year after his arrest. There's a simple, basic idea that all of these episodes circle around. What is the root of all evil?
We're here to get answers. It's our job to understand why.
The whole show is filmed in this one-shot, real-time style that I've seen a lot of people call gimmicky or distracting. Now, I will say, I think I may be biased towards big, long shots that constantly move around and never actually end. For brain reasons. But I also just disagree that this style is a gimmick of the show. I think it emphasizes what the story is communicating. We are human beings looking at the world through a limited human perspective. The camera in most media is functionally omniscient. It can cut back and forth from anywhere to anywhere at any point in time, and that gives us a power real life rarely does. In Adolescence, every movement of the camera is necessarily losing something, following one thing or another with the understanding that whatever gets left behind will be left behind forever, unless it is also captured by a camera. Much like Jamie's family, much like the detectives working his case, there are some things we just won't see. We're left with limited information and assumptions. Why did Jamie commit this murder? Was it because of how he was treated at school?
You were called names and you were physically abused.
No, I was just tripped up and spat on.
Was it because of a misogynistic culture he retreated to online?
80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. Woman, you must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way.
Was it something to do with his parents, his dad's struggles to regulate his emotions, his mum's lack of authority? Or was there just something wrong with him in the way the psychologist was trying to pin down? In the show's last episode, we get a moment that I think really encapsulates this. Jamie's mother tearfully admitting to her husband that she could recognize aspects of themselves and the way they raised Jamie that could have contributed to his actions.
Come home, slam the door, straight up the stairs on the computer. See the light on at 1 o'clock in the morning. He has a terrible temper, but so have you.
And when the dad comes back with a response that they can't blame themselves, that they can't pretend they had some absolute control over their son's behavior, there's obviously a truth to what he's saying, but it's also undeniably true that they did somewhere play a role. She wasn't a bad mum, he wasn't a bad dad, but they still made him.
Should we do more though?
I think it'd be good if we accepted that maybe we should have done.
If there is one clear statement I think the show makes, it's that there aren't clear answers to questions like this. All of these elements could contribute and connect, and none are necessarily irrelevant, but none spell out the entire case. This can't be dismissed as just the result of abuse or poverty or family instability or any other classic TV stereotypes of what causes evil acts. There is blame, but the blame cannot easily fall on one isolated thing. Anyway, a bunch of conservatives immediately got mad at the show because it blamed a crime on a white male.
Are working class white men and boys always the easy target?
The show was branded as anti-white propaganda, and a full story circulated about it being based on a tragic stabbing committed by a black British teenager, which had also been circulated as a full story, mostly by English Defence League co-founder Stephen Yaxley Lennon, about a Muslim immigrant with a made-up name, which resulted in widespread anti-immigrant rioting by, and this is just my description, stupid, bald, divorced gammon cunts. And I get to say that because I'll also probably go bald in the next 10 years and do not tan well. Adolescence was not trying to depict the 2024 Southport stabbings, something that can easily be verified by the fact that when they took place, the show had already started filming. Again, stupid cunts. It's not based on any specific real-world person, because doing that would be completely at odds with the whole premise of the show.
It's absurd to say that this is only committed by black boys. You know, like, it's absurd. It's not true. And history, you know, shows a lot of cases of kids from all races committing these crimes. We're not making a point about race with this. We are making a point about masculinity. We're trying to get inside a problem. We're not saying this is one thing or another. We're saying this is about boys.
To be frank, there would be only one obvious result of making Jamie specifically an ethnic minority character, and it'd be to twist the entire show into yet another conversation about the potential dangers of ethnic minorities. This isn't about censorship of the ability to have conversations about that. Top Boy is literally one of the most acclaimed shows to come out of the UK in the last few years, and is almost exclusively about black gang violence. Not like that, Jack. Not where the minorities are three-dimensional characters. I just wanted to see a crazy, scary one. But that's not what this show is about, and it's not what this video is about. Yes, racism is bad. Yes, all races have the same capacity for violence. Yes, there is no shortage of white British men violently abusing women, even if it gets far less media coverage. And yes, there is growing concern about the mental state of young men globally, regardless of their race. That is the conversation the show is trying to have, and that's why there's so much desperation to distract from it. Violence isn't tied strictly to race, but it is unavoidably, overwhelmingly gendered. Not exclusively. Even in the case of Adolescence, there's an entire plot built around the bullying and assault of a male student by another girl. Men are often victims, and most men are not violent, but violence from domestic to sexual are all vastly disproportionately committed by men. But also, you pretty much definitely already knew that, and me just stating it would be about as deep and meaningful as me just citing racial crime statistics and then going, yeah? Yeah? The point obviously can't just end with men are bad. I'm a man. A big tough man. Some of my best friends are men. I have no interest in just concluding there's something innately predatory or abusive about men, for the simple fact that my own lived experience is being a man who has never felt any desire to be abusive or a predator. I think it'd be as dumb to say men in general are just bad as to blame an ethnicity or nationality for these problems. That's right, folks, I don't think all men are bad. Make sure to smash that like button for my extremely brave, controversial opinions. I think actually the problem is feminists and annoying teenagers with 50 followers on Twitter. Neither Adolescence nor the response to it give us a complete picture of where society has gone wrong with young men. What I do think they capture is the kind of discussion currently taking place. Everyone wants to find a reason, a single, easily isolated cause to the increase of young male instability and lack of direction, radicalization, and violence. People cling to narratives, be it narratives of toxic multiculturalism or feminist belittlement of men, or brainwashing by Andrew Tate and widespread online ideological grooming.
It's the Andrew Tate shite.
There is a question of what new problems we now face in a world where young people increasingly experience completely separate lives through a phone screen, distracted and overstimulated, Subway Surfer clip in the corner. Lives that are more and more detached from their own physical worlds, particularly as parents struggle to make ends meet. Then there's the question of new styles of parenting, the changing shape of families, constant debates about helicopter parents or absentee parents, or whether we need to start beating children again. All of this culminating in one dominant narrative: men don't have a place in modern society.
And some of them, a young man came up to me the other day. He said, I'm not even sure if I can give my own mother a hug.
The father's role has become unclear and diminished, and boys feel unguided, alienated, and excluded, struggling to find meaning, purpose, and identity. One aspect is clear: if there's one thing we need to look out for, it's of the most potentially at-risk group of young boys living in modern society. Emotionally sensitive, fatherless introverts living in low-income areas with unrestricted access to the internet and social media, and an increased interest in escapist fantasy and violent video games. Oh bother. Maybe there wouldn't be as much misinformation about the production of Adolescence if everyone just used ground news, because then you might have noticed how the outlets trying to push this anti-white propaganda narrative are overwhelmingly right-wing publications, often with mixed factuality. What a twist! Ground News is a website and app created by a former NASA engineer that gathers news across countries and political perspectives to provide a visual breakdown for bias, reliability, and ownership. Features include coverage details to give an overview of what narratives are being pushed, and bias distribution to get a sense of what political perspectives those stories are connected to. Headline comparisons make it surprisingly quick and easy to understand the framing being sold to you. For instance, in the case of Adolescence, you can see most outlets talking broadly about the merits of the show itself, like one story on the many different ways the show details the current crisis of young boys, while right-wing source The Blaze focuses exclusively on the show's war on white males. Netflix is up to its old feminist tricks. A blind spot feed also showcases many different stories and the ways they could be slanted. Can you guess how many conservative outlets covered the fact that millions of Americans might be losing their health insurance under the Trump admin? That's right, it's 2. And if you check out my link at ground.news/saint or scan the QR code on screen, you can get 40% off a Ground News Vantage subscription. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video, and thank you. The other week, I was reading through the 2025 Lost Boys report by the Center for Social Justice, and I found myself with a repeating question. Is this fucking play about us? Spending any number of hours disengaging from reality and going into potentially violent simulations encourages young minds to depersonalize and dehumanize faces and names. Some boys are at greater risk, the boy who is a loner or socially excluded. There is a crisis of masculinity in this country, a search for what it means to be a young man growing up in Britain today. The root of this problem is in the home. 2.5 million children in the UK do not live with a father figure, representing 1 in 5 of all dependent children. I've always felt a bit disconnected from the conversation about what's going wrong with young men, because most of the things people cite as what makes young men go wrong is me. I think I first felt this back when there was constant media reports about mature content in video games and efforts to ban games because of the bad influence they could have on boys. Something that at the time felt patently ridiculous to me and most kids who played games.
Are you saying that Devin Moore shot 3 people in the head because of a video game?
What we're saying is that Devin Moore was in effect trained to do what he did.
Playing Hitman didn't make me want to garrote anyone. I didn't want to go on a shooting spree because of GTA. I played Mass Effect, and I will never be a blue lesbian. Or will I?
And I'm definitely not going to let Mass Effect in my house.
But I think the talking point that always felt quite personal was the bit about how dangerous and harmful single-parent families are, especially fatherless homes for young boys. Now, I felt quite happy in my single-parent home, and I don't want to murder anyone. So I did my research to try and understand this disconnect by typing fatherless behavior on YouTube search and immediately watching the first thing I saw.
We are going to talk about the psychological aspect and how all of this happens to begin with. What causes this to happen? We can understand that A plus B equals C, but why does it? Fatherless behavior can manifest itself in criminal acts, but in other times it doesn't. This needs to be explained.
Hey, it's me!
In psychology, there are two things that shape us to make us who we are, which is our nature and it is the nurture. The environment itself is that we lack a father and we lack a masculine role model, while at the same time we have a mother who is trying to act out both roles at the same time, which is simply not possible. If the submissive personality type does not have a masculine role model, what will happen is that they will simply submit to the will of the mother.
Now, far be it from me to claim that a channel with videos like white people didn't own slaves and why ugly women are mean may be biased, but I feel like the language here really reflects both the way I often hear people go on about this topic and why I always used to find it kind of dumb. Like, just taking this sentence as an example, if the submissive personality type does not have a masculine role model, they will simply submit to the will of the mother. I don't feel that I submissively submitted to my mother's will. I think I just respected my mum as my primary caregiver, and then because of that respect, we were able to have a relationship built on mutual trust and support.
And we have a mother who is trying to act out both roles at the same time, which is simply not possible, as a father is supposed to be the good role model for the young boy, and at the same time, to keep him in line and to be that physical dominating force that keeps him in check. Make sure that when he becomes an adolescent young male, he doesn't simply do whatever he wants and engages in criminal behavior.
My mom wasn't trying to be a masculine disciplinary authority figure and failing. She was taking a nurturing parental role, and that made me feel secure and open to the world as I grew up, which to me seems regular. I think it's interesting that this video chooses, of all examples, August Wilson's Fences as an example of the necessary role fathers have teaching sons what behaviors to imitate and the importance of keeping them in line. If you've seen Fences, you'll know it ends with a son trying to make peace with his father, whose violent authority both psychologically scarred his son and directly caused his estrangement from his family.
Everywhere I looked, I saw Troy Maxson staring right back at me. Hiding under the bed, in the closet. I'm just saying, I gotta find a way to get rid of that shadow, Mama.
The father dies sad and alone, and it is only at that point the son is able to acknowledge his father's good intentions, however deeply misguided his behavior was. That's what this scene is showing. Not a man teaching his child valuable lessons, but using the excuse of teaching a lesson to overpower him as revenge for him trying to protect his mother from his father's abuse.
You gonna take over my house? You gonna wear my pants? You gonna go in there and stretch out on my bed?
This is not an example of what makes fathers valuable.
You never done nothing but hold me back, afraid I was gonna be better than you. All you ever did was try and make me scared of you.
It's an example of cycles of bad parenting that damage children and their relationships at home. It is the fence that this dated view of fatherhood and masculinity builds between parents and their kids, physically and emotionally.
How come you ain't never liked me?
Like you? Who the hell said I got to like you?
Love is mom. If you got a dad you can love as well, even better. But you don't necessarily need it if you got both of them in the household, right?
Mothers cannot physically overpower their children. If a 16-year-old boy wants to do something, he's going to do it, and his mom isn't going to stop him. He can physically overpower her. The person who does and can stop him, though, is the father. When the father says something, you take it very seriously.
As a kid growing up, you have to be loved, but you need somebody you fear.
All you ever did was try and make me scared of you.
You need that physical, strong, dominant presence to tell the kid no.
See how almost everything here about why fathers are important is predicated on them being an authority who can physically dominate their children? And I look at that from an outside perspective, and in a kind of dismissive way I think to myself, wow, thank fuck I didn't have that problem.
It might well be that when you are around 12 and you're a boy, that's exactly the right time for you to have a father who can step on you around.
You want to respect mom, but maybe, not at the level you respect a man that's going to check you.
Right.
And then the fear.
This whole dominant, submissive, authority-based perspective is so assumed that as a kid it just came off to me as, frankly, a bunch of people whose dads bullied them as children trying to justify their own abuse. At no point did I feel like I was in a battle for physical dominance with my mother, and at no age did I think to myself, wow, I guess I'm now old enough to physically overpower her if I want.
And there was this kid that lived down the street, one of the places we live, who was the son of a single mother. She was about 5'4", and he was about 6 feet tall, and he was 14. And we used to hear his mother. We didn't know them, but we used to hear them, fighting in the hallway, for example. And what the hell could she do about it? He was 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Short of telling him to get the hell out and then potentially enforcing that with the police, he had her cornered.
That isn't just how teenagers think. That's a perspective that's taught. It's how a family in an already severely broken relationship thinks. And if that's what fatherhood is, I was unconvinced fatherless homes were the problem. To use Jordan Peterson's example, I really don't think if that woman's son was just physically weaker than her, it would suddenly fix the underlying issues of his home life. In fact, if I felt there was anything that kept me away from violence or violent repression, it was that I didn't have this perspective or experience. Now, there are two things. One, obviously, bad outcomes of a bad upbringing aren't just limited to if you become a violent criminal. Like, by the terms of this hyper-dominant, hyper-submissive split, I would obviously be the little cuck in the pink shirt. And did I personally feel that not having a father at home did have some negative impacts? Sure. I mean, I do YouTube video essays as a job. Especially as a kid, there are a lot of male rituals instilled in culture that a mum is a lot less likely to have first-hand experience with. In particular, a lot of young boys, especially in my generation, seemed incredibly insecure about behaving in ways that made them seem gay. Being treated like a normal boy often involved me needing to learn the right ways to look, to walk, to talk, to stand, the right interests to have, and the right ways to express those interests. Because, you won't want people to think you're gay. That'd be cringe. Genuinely, one of my strongest memories of my dad is the time he explained to me the correct way for a man to cross his legs. Thanks, mate. For the record, this isn't me saying mums aren't going to have experience being rigidly told the right way to perform their gender. And I'll also acknowledge fatherless behavior as a shaming tactic is something women experience all the time in a different context. More about men wanting to take women down a peg for being confident in themselves and their own bodies, because meanwhile they struggle to hold eye contact with the checkout girl at the supermarket. Mostly I just don't feel comfortable speaking as an authority on experiences I haven't had. And I'm just saying there are weirdly specific ways men check each other that might not come up. Hey, by the way, could you check your fingernails real quick? Oh, mate. Mate. Oh. As scholar Adrian Keller once put it when defining fatherless behavior, when you weird as hell, for no reason. Like the second YouTube video I found on this topic pointed out, this is basically what fatherless behavior as a meme has been boiled down to. Just cringe.
Fatherless child behavior TikTok, cringe compilation, furries, dream stands, weebs, etc. You know what? Screw it. Let's make the range just a little broader. Let's say all English speakers have no dads. It's funny because in the first second of the fatherless child comp, they have to include a disclaimer that not having a dad does not mean you'll end up like these people. Why do they say people in quotes? You're talking about them like they're war criminals and not just folks who put on fursuits.
So yeah, I'd say when I was younger, I did struggle with feeling like I was performing manhood correctly. And I can imagine if these normal masculine behaviors came more naturally to me as a result of having a dad around, that would have made me feel less socially isolated at times when I was younger. And I'm sure to a lot of men, that alone not being more instilled in me already makes me a failed submissive beta new male. But that's just like, your opinion, man. As an adult, I really don't need other men to let me know I've met their standards of masculinity. If it was like an odd thing for people to obsess over who are also extremely insecure about seeming gay, by the standard metrics of conservative society, I objectively show no indicators of a damaged or failed upbringing. I am happily married with a relatively stable career and home life and a child on the way, with no criminal record or history of criminal behaviors. These are not things I personally use to dictate someone's value. Some people can't have or don't want kids or to get married, and some crimes are good. But this is the male role that in concept conservatives value. That's why masculinity has to then be gatekept with these arbitrary standards. That's why we have the pink shirt cuck. Basically just as a way to say, even when there's nothing anyone can actually point to and say your life is worse than theirs, you've still somehow failed at being a man. So if that is anyone's best argument as to why single motherhood damaged me despite meeting your standards of male success, that I've struggled more to pick up on male rituals to satisfy the discomfort of literally insecure children, I guess I just don't fucking care what you think, and I'm gonna go sleep in a big bed with my non-binary spouse.
I mean, elephants are unbelievably intelligent. They have a prehensile trunk, right? And anything that has a prehensile attachment tends to be extraordinarily intelligent, like octopuses, for example, which only live 3 years, something like that, but appear to be at least as smart as dogs.
Statistics are also important. I am not all men. I'm an anecdote, and maybe I just have the correct brain chemicals to be impervious to the harm of a fatherless upbringing. As the Lost Boys report states, 76% of men who do turn to violent criminal behavior come from fatherless homes, and you're going to find many headlines agreeing with that premise. I'll leave arguing of the data itself to other people better at arguing those topics and assume the basic point here is correct. Non-anecdotally, fatherless homes do tend to create instability, and fathers clearly serve a beneficial role in a home life. As a guy who is about to be a father, yeah, I fucking hope so. It's difficult to argue in defense of single mothers without some people getting the impression you're saying fathers serve no needed purpose whatsoever. And I'm sure you can find people arguing that's the case. That is not my perspective. As a father, I want to think of myself as providing something important to my child's development. Where I clearly disagree is what unique role I have as a father and how this factors into these statistics. Like for instance, you know what else tends to create instability? Poverty. Beyond any deeper role a father can provide, a second income and having someone else to share the load of balancing work and childcare is a massive benefit to any family. As these same reports reflect, the absurd cost of raising a child in the modern day, even when both parents technically contribute, goes up notably when the family is separated. This creates more stress at home and more instability, and in most cases an increased likelihood that the child will be forced to spend a lot of time alone without guidance or support while their sole parent works to provide for them. This in turn means less time and money to help support your child's education, social life, hobbies and interests, all things that play a major role in personal development. For most of my childhood, my mum was a self-employed hairdresser who mostly worked from home, giving her some work flexibility and meaning we could spend relatively more time together. Regardless of income, I don't discount that this was a massive life privilege.
What is it you want to... Shall I say? What is it you want to ask me, Jack?
You always pretty much built your entire career around being able to spend as much time with me as possible.
Yeah, the most important thing to me was to be able to be there with you, so that I was always there to talk to you through stuff.
Yeah, so it was like, even though we did sort of struggle, you specifically picked a career that made it so that
yeah, I mean, I could have gone and got I probably would have been better if I'd been in a salon for a longer period of time. I probably would have earned more, but then that wouldn't have fitted in with me wanting to be able to take you to school, pick you up and sort of just be there, especially teenage years. But I think
you probably need the most guidance.
I think teenage years is people think when they're babies. No, teenage years is crucial. I think that there's someone. I know a lot of people are not able to do that, but obviously I made sure that I was able to do that and be there, and I sympathise with people what are not
able to do that.
But are not able to do that.
The only other thing that can alleviate this is community centres, outside support and third spaces that help kids socialise and engage with their interests without large amounts of excess cash. Luckily, corporations and repeated conservative governments have done everything they can to get rid of those things. Now, do I think this economic argument explains a lot of the statistics people often peg to single-parent homes? Yeah, the idea that it's controversial to say we might see better outcomes for kids if we stopped constantly making life harder for the vast majority of parents who are poor to the benefit of making life easier for the incredibly rich makes my head explode. And this obviously is cumulative. Most people will stay in the economic class they were born into, and as a result, poor overworked parents lead to poor overworked kids who then also have the same problem with their own kids. But I wouldn't have said what I said at the start of this video if I was then just going to turn around and blame every issue young boys in modern society have on poverty. I do think giving working class parents the space to even have a relationship with their kids is always going to be the main point, but that alone wouldn't have solved all of my problems as a kid, and I don't think it would have solved everyone else's. So what else is there? I keep thinking about that clip from Fences. A man lashing out, scarred by his experiences with his own estranged violent father, ultimately making all the same mistakes. And the idea that this somehow reflects something lacking in men today. Maybe not in its details. I don't doubt a lot of the same people who'd elevate characters like Denzel Washington's Troy would then turn around at a full description of him and say, oh, no, not those parts. It reminds me of how 6 years later I'm still getting notifications that someone in my comment section is trying to convince everyone Skylar Wyatt is the real villain of Breaking Bad. I also no longer like the hairstyle I had in 2019, and I also found it annoying when I used to talk like this all the time.
The show is multi-layered.
But people really like to pick and choose what parts of Walter Wyatt, a self-obsessed rapist murderer who fully admits his actions were based on his own desperate ego regardless of the harm it did to his family.
He did it for me. Good at it.
Makes him a better person than his wife, who, I guess, smoked a cigarette while pregnant and slept with someone else while getting divorced. You see this same pattern of misguided idolizing of obviously fucked men in a lot of similar characters like Don Draper and Tony Soprano, both of which were also direct deconstructions of an outdated idea of broken, dysfunctional masculinity. All three of these characters are united by their desperation to chase some stereotype of male dominance, as a Godfather or Scarface or some image from a 50s ad. And none of them are happy, and none of them feel satisfied, and crucially, all of them are terrible fathers.
I'm supposed to get a vasectomy when this is my male heir? Look at him.
Whose children either pity them or outright hate them if they even have a real relationship.
We're a family!
As the Lost Boys report says, Andrew Tate and his entire sphere of influence are symptoms of a desire for guidance, a form of masculinity to learn from, a model to fit yourself into as a man. This isn't just about him seeking out kids. To some extent, those kids seek out him. The line often used is that young boys today feel alienated because they are shamed for being men or trying to be masculine. All my own experiences have told me is that this is completely sidestepping the actual conversation. It's a shallow, cowardly way to get around the fact that many people's idea of masculinity is obviously self-destructive and only makes feelings of insecurity and instability fester. If boys are shamed for being men, what do you mean by being a man? Because it doesn't seem like it's sex organs or chromosomes. Chromosomes didn't dictate if I had a man haircut or checked my fingernails the man way as a kid. And apparently it isn't just about being a healthy, functioning adult or anything else that isn't strictly tied to a gender. It's the same problem we run into with defining fatherhood. We need a basic, coherent definition of what masculinity actually means. Luckily, I learned all about this from violent video games.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
You may have seen this Goya painting before, perhaps in a meme. Although Goya never actually named it, the title it came to be known by is also its most common interpretation, Saturn devouring his son. Based on the Roman myth itself, inspired by the Greek myth of a king of gods being foretold that one day one of his sons would rise up and overthrow him, trying to prevent this from happening by eating all of his children. In the end, his son Jupiter escapes this fate and frees his siblings by doing exactly that, fighting back against his cannibal father and taking his place as the king of gods. He may also know Jupiter as Zeus. The irony of this situation was surely obvious to everyone except Saturn himself. In his horrific abuse of his children out of fear of being left behind, he gives his children exactly the motivation and justification to do just that. The prophecy was just a simple fact that all of us live with. Eventually, this will all end. Nobody lives forever. At best, you'll be able to pass on some wisdom or understanding to a new generation. But out of Saturn's fear of losing, he guarantees his own destruction. The only lesson he really ends up teaching his children is that there is no way to coexist, and that is the lesson they learn. Goya, again, never explicitly said that's what this was depicting. The black paintings came out of a time of extreme mental turmoil for Goya, having witnessed some of the worst parts of humanity while also struggling with near-fatal illness. There are many different ways to interpret the work, and people have. They also pointed out some inconsistencies to this depiction of Saturn. Usually he has some iconic objects associated with him, a scythe or an hourglass, and the legend gives the impression Saturn consumed his children whole to keep in his belly, not ripping them limb by limb. But I think the naked brutality of the image is exactly what makes it powerful. What are we really seeing here? Blood pours out of the body. This kill was fresh. A man, wild-eyed, commits excruciating violence to another human being to feed himself. A drive to become something almost inhuman, to rob something else of life out of the fear that it's needed to remain strong. At its heart, that is the image of Saturn devouring his son. Why am I making this point? No particular reason. The original God of War was explicitly modelled as a response to what creative director David Jaffe called political correctness. It is a self-consciously brutal, relentlessly macho series, pretty comparable to the older power fantasies of Conan the Barbarian that it was also a direct throwback to.
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
Ares! Destroy my enemies! And my life is yours.
Each entry is desperate to top off the last with depravity and gore and also several quick-time event sex minigames. I was 11 years old when I played the first game, and I thought it was great. Kratos is a uniquely video gamey character in the way his connection with the player is immediate and symbiotic. He's a callous prick who constantly throws childish temper tantrums and deals with basically every inconvenience, no matter how minor, with absurd over-the-top violence. And maybe in other media it'd be hard to keep going along with a guy who throws innocent civilians off rooftops and random concubines into saw-like contraptions.
Thank the gods you came back for me! I didn't come back for you. No! You again?
But in an action game, isn't it kind of what you want for a guy to just immediately jump into constant, mindless, rage-filled violence? It makes the video game fun. But what I didn't notice as an 11-year-old is that God of War also has themes.
I was trying to make you a great warrior. You succeeded.
It's easy to overlook, and a lot of people do, but inside of Kratos isn't just a one-dimensional player surrogate, but also a very conflicted, sad man. The first game literally opens with him trying to unalive, which means kill himself. The reasons for that are what make him a surprisingly compelling character.
A past he could never escape.
Kratos is a Spartan, a soldier raised on the battlefield into a life defined completely by power, conquest, and his ability to lead other soldiers to achieve those ends. Highly relatable to my own life.
How much is enough, Kratos? When will it end?
When the glory of Sparta is known throughout the world.
The glory of Sparta. You did this for yourself.
If you know what a Spartan is, there's a fairly good chance that what you're imagining is at least partly based on the Zack Snyder movie 300. adaptation of the Frank Miller graphic novel of the same name, itself based on the historic Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan warriors bravely faced off against hundreds of thousands of ruthless Persian invaders. They may have also had a few thousand other Greek soldiers there, and maybe like 1,000 slaves also. I don't think they dressed like that. Basically, if you know slightly more about what a Spartan is, you know 300 is almost complete fantasy. Spartans have a very specific connection to masculine values, in part because a whole mythology has been built around Spartans that has way more to do with masculine perception than anything the Spartans actually did.
300 years of Spartan warrior society to create the finest soldiers the world has ever known.
Even in death, a Spartan stands tall for battle. You are a Spartan, are you not?
You often hear people excitedly cite facts about Spartans like, they refused to use bows or wear armor because that was too weak and cowardly.
Persian cowards!
Or, Spartans almost never lost a battle because they'd sooner all die than surrender.
Taught never to retreat, never to surrender. Taught that death on the battlefield in service to Sparta was the greatest glory he could achieve in his life.
And they're really just remembering the movie 300, or remembering something someone else said based on the movie 300. Even just based on the incomplete histories we have on Spartan society, nearly every one of these facts can easily be debunked. This Spartan mirage, also known as laconophilia, goes back much further than that movie and was endorsed by many groups including, oh no.
If he'd been small or puny, or sickly or misshapen, he would have been discarded.
If they showed any signs of weakness, well, the Spartans weren't squeamish about taking that child off to a pit outside Sparta, outside the actual living space, and throwing them in a pit where these children, these babies, these infants were bound to die.
And it isn't completely divorced from reality. Spartan society was often harsh, with a rigid structure that placed a military class at the top of its hierarchy. But Spartans did wear armor, and they did lose battles frequently, and they did oftentimes surrender. Their mythology isn't so much about them as about ideals they're used to represent. Ideals like freedom and liberty.
You have many slaves, Xerxes, but few warriors. The world will know that free men stood against a tyrant.
Which is weird when a giant chunk of their population were helot slaves, and also the military was mostly just used to massacre any who fought back. More than anything, they're an ideal of masculinity, a goal to be strived for.
The old ones say we Spartans are descended from Hercules himself. Bold Leonidas gives testament to our bloodline.
The importance of the Spartan 300 isn't historical, it's aspirational, which conveniently happens to result in legions of men who will fight and die on behalf of the state, who will throw their lives away no matter the cost, dismiss their personal emotional connections in the name of that state, and are incredibly hostile to anything that could possibly deviate or question those priorities. Which, to me, sounds pretty convenient for the state. Anyway, Kratos.
You are nothing but a pawn in a game you don't even know is being played.
Kratos never wanted anything more than to be the ultimate Spartan. That's what he told himself, until the war god Ares offered him even more power to meet that goal, and as a result, Kratos killed his entire family.
You gave them up in your quest for ultimate power.
There is a price to pay for everything you gain.
Not that price.
This is what breaks him. He is trapped eternally between a life dedicated to meeting a perfect masculine ideal and genocidal resentment of the elite class of gods that pushed him to achieve it.
Kratos had turned the pain of his memories into hatred. Hatred for the gods, who had refused to free him from the nightmares of his past deeds. And so he went to Rhodes to deliver the final blow to the besieged city.
He really has nothing else, to the point where later games show Kratos becoming a god himself and doing basically nothing except killing more people in larger numbers over and over again until the entire pantheon of gods turn against him. But he learned it from you, Dad.
You will pay for this, Zeus.
Zeus is Kratos' father, by the way, and then he kills him and himself again. If you don't play video games, God of War kind of sounds like a dumb parody of a video game someone made up for an episode of CSI about a school shooter. If you're someone who was concerned about the harmful influence of video games on young men in the early 2000s, God of War is kind of everything you'd be afraid of. And I could say, well, I turned out fine, or actually plebs, it was actually self-aware postmodern commentary. But those games did obviously pander in some ways.
Do you know how long it's been since a real man has come into my chambers?
Like I say, the original game very intentionally leaned into politically correct male power fantasies where you're clearly supposed to think the endless, merciless slaughter is cool, and every woman in the game has big jiggling boobies. And yes, my mum did happen to only walk in on the game during those cutscenes. But a part of me will always have a soft spot for that story because I think in a weird way it really does speak to a deeper struggle.
Just as Zeus was compelled to destroy his father Kronos, you are compelled to do the same. No son should destroy his own father.
No, I have no father.
To be molded into a tool as a weapon of a state, to be raised to think success is only measured in meeting those ideals, and then to realize that same society you're trying to appease is ultimately indifferent to you, it's powerful. And as the story demonstrates, it's a cycle of misery and it offers no escape.
I am so sorry, my love.
And it just so happens this story was built around the ultimate fantasy idea of traditional masculinity. And I think that's notable.
Because it's the instinct to conquer. It's inside of a man. It's been dumbed down by the Matrix. They try and numb you. They numb you with entertainment. They try and put you in the festival crowd. They numb you with shit food. They numb you with depression, all this other garbage. But truthfully, if you're a man, you look in the mirror, what will make me happy? My empire will make me happy. I'm just taking it from other people. I'm winning the game. I'm conquering. And that's what I think truly is going to give you purpose in life. It's just conquest. Men have always been this way. That's why war was even happening in the first place.
Clearly I'm not the only one who saw this in God of War, because then in 2018 it was revived as a story about an old man reflecting on his violent past while trying to do better with his own son.
Pretend to be everything you are not. Teacher, husband, father. But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. You will always be a monster.
I'm not gonna lie, playing through this game was literally the first time I ever thought about being a father. I may not be having a kid right now if I hadn't played God of War, and that's just modern life. Atreus is, in the terms of that earlier video, a hyper-submissive child. He's terrified of his father and clearly had a much more distant relationship with him relative to his mother up to her death at the start of the story. It's easy to see this as a conscious choice on Kratos' part, something the sequel game highlights.
Have you nothing to say to your son?
What would you have me say, Faye?
Anything. Let him learn your voice. Let him know you.
He is far better off knowing as little as possible.
What else could he offer his son other than passing his brokenness onto him? This is a modern narrative you've probably heard before. In fact, you've heard it several times in this video.
I want him to get as far away from my life as he possibly can get. You the only decent thing ever happened to me, Rose. I wish him that. But I don't wish him nothing else for my life.
My rotten, fucking putrid genes have infected my kid's soul. That's my gift to my son.
Fence is about a father trying and failing to avoid passing his trauma onto his son. Adolescence is in part about a father realizing not passing his trauma onto his son isn't enough.
But when I was his age, my dad used to fucking batter me. Sometimes he'd take the belt to me and he'd fucking whack me, and he'd whack me. I'd never do that to me kids. And I didn't, did I? I just wanted to be better.
So stuck on getting through that trauma that he overlooks the unique issues his own kids might be facing.
He used to take me to football. He'd cheer me on and everything, but But when I'd fuck up, he'd just look away. I don't know. Ashamed.
And in all of those cases, that trauma is directly linked to some dated view of masculinity, paternal tough love, and a rigid adherence to ideas of hierarchy and domination, especially physically. My immediate instinct when I say this is to feel like I'm misrepresenting or going out of my way to demonize traditional masculinity, like I'm strawmanning what being a man is. But whenever we come back to defining what traditional masculinity means, seemingly this is it. Nobody gets mad when young boys are being taught the importance of teamwork and cooperation. This is the thing where it's a problem that young boys are being discouraged to think this way. See what I mean about how this feels like a cowardly sidestep from the conversation? Yeah, obviously it's a good thing to discourage raising men this way. And if you do want to say that doing that is disgracing some true essence of what being a man is, I feel like you're really putting me in a box here. It's almost inescapable that these stories turn out the same way. Either the man continues to descend into this self-harm version of manhood, replicating the same childhood pain over and over again into oblivion, or he chooses a different path. God of War itself shares a lot of similarities with the earlier released game The Last of Us, now a hit show on HBO Max. Sorry, I mean HBO Max. Which also shares a lot of similarities with The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, which is on the BDS list, so you better not watch it legally. And in all these cases, these closed-off father figures are forced to seek an alternative. One of Kratos' core lessons to Atreus is the importance of closing your heart in the face of a merciless, hostile world. It's a mentality built on the worldview Kratos has been working from his whole life. Everything is a battle. Everything is life or death, domination or submission. The only legitimate authority is power. Do not allow yourself to feel for them. They will not feel for you. Whether or not it's actually true, it's something that lets a warrior act without hesitation, keep their guard up and protect themselves. I will not elaborate further on how The Last of Us shows the consequences of not thinking this way. So much of masculinity is obviously tied up in the physical form of a man, not even strictly how strong or athletic someone actually is, but their ability to command an intimidating aura. Again, going back to this idea that a man and a father are measured by their ability to step on someone. I don't know how related to this subject this headline is, but I feel like it is, and I want whoever wrote it to feel bad about themselves. And masculinity, defined in these strict terms, brings us to the saying that when all you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. Oh look, it's a guy who fights exclusively with a hammer.
Destroy us! No more. No more. For the sake of our children, we must be better.
If the ultimate teaching of a father is to dominate to survive, domination becomes the only way to survive. Ultimately, when it comes time for war against an oppressive regime, Atreus comforts himself with that same mantra Kratos taught him, to close his heart in the knowledge that war is only won by those willing to sacrifice everything, echoing perfectly the ideology of that earlier, more brutal Kratos.
It's war. Wars are won by those who are willing to sacrifice everything.
And Kratos realizes he's wrong.
What are you doing?
Son, listen closely. You feel their pain because that is who you are. And you must never sacrifice that. Never. Not for anyone. I was wrong, Atreus. I was wrong. Open your heart. Open your heart to their suffering. That is your mother's wish. And mine as well. Today, son.
I often find myself thinking, is there any kind of masculine truth I think I could believe in? When I think about masculinity, do I only think of this Spartan mirage? Like, maybe the concept of masculinity only exists because of institutions that want you to feel empowered by basically throwing your life away in their name and being mercilessly cruel to anything that deviates from that. Is it just an ideology that justifies suffering? And is it that the actual good parts of masculinity, the parts that teach kids the importance of conviction and camaraderie, aren't really specific to masculinity at all? That this is just an overt way to lump universal values in with a bunch of fascist bullshit? Maybe. I don't think there's a universal objective truth to masculinity. I think we define it based on the ways we were raised and the conditions we were raised in. You could say this is a consequence of nihilism on my part. And I think in a lot of ways, I am a nihilist. But there's another kind of nihilism that says, if meaning is something we invent and not an objective part of reality, we can also invent something different. I don't just think of myself as a person or as a parent. I think of myself as a father and a man. And to me, being a man isn't about running down a checklist of requirements written 1,000 years ago by the simp of a tyrannical state. It's definitely not running down a checklist of requirements written by this rapist pedophile.
She's 16.
Once you're 18, if you want to get yourself a real man, I know a guy.
And being a father isn't about my duty to pass that same mentality onto my son. When I think about being a man, I think about the opposite. Creating a path that is my own, an identity for myself. That is my conviction. Whatever beliefs or behaviors people want to peg as deviant or degenerate, I really don't care, and I don't think that's unique solely to masculinity. I don't think it's even unique to people. If there is one thing I do think is universal, it's that we all share this universe. We can all, hopefully, see aspects of ourselves in each other. There's a problem with the way we talk about young men and the crisis of masculinity. That lack, that feeling of missing something about your own identity and desperately wanting to figure it out, I get it. I really get it. And to see some destructive, toxic element to masculinity and feel the need to isolate young boys from it, I get that too. Something needs to fill that absence. An alternative way of perceiving and being. I think destruction can be replaced with creation. A different path that isn't made to isolate but open us to one another. Now obviously this is really vague and idealistic. Materially, we do exist in a world where we need to protect ourselves, especially from states and institutions that are driven strictly by an endless hunger for power. There is clearly no way I could make a video condemning violence in every form while Israel is committing an open genocide of tens of thousands of Palestinian children. It's interesting that I bring up The Last of Us when the second game infamously came out of an incredibly naive take on Israel's treatment of Palestinians specifically. Neil Druckmann explicitly based a lot of the game's themes on a cycle of violence that I do think has some abstract value, but in context completely misses the actual dynamic of that genocide. Violence can't be demonized in some blanket way when it is sometimes the only possible response to overwhelming oppression. But that's a topic for a very different video. The point is just that I'm aware even the destructive aspects we often reduce to toxic masculinity do play a role. The question is, what role? There are two wolves inside you. One says everything is against you, an enemy to be dominated, everything must be conquered, and anything less makes you a failure, a degenerate, and a disgrace. One says there is good and bad in this world, and the only responsibility you have is to yourself and to the basic dignity of the people sharing your planet. Which wolf wins? Why did Jamie commit these crimes? There is still no definitive answer, and you're absolutely not getting one from a 30-year-old YouTuber with limited life experience. But I'll say this. It hurts when you feel like you deserve your basic identity to be respected, and it isn't. It hurts to be seen as weak and pathetic and undeserving because you don't look the way people do on Instagram, and you don't know the right way to talk to girls, and you struggle to make friends, and it doesn't feel like anyone could possibly understand or empathize. It doesn't escape me that beyond all these deep feelings about dominance and manhood, a lot of teenage boys really just want a girlfriend and think people like Andrew Tate are gonna teach them good tricks. At 15, I didn't have a dad to guide me on these things, but I did have the r/seduction subreddit. It taught me that girls like it when you're cruel to them, and if you don't sufficiently neg them into submission, you'll quickly be put in the friend zone. I'm now happily married to someone who was my friend. These people don't really teach boys how to get the things they actually want. They teach them an identity.
I say the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing about being a man is you're born without value. Society doesn't care about you. You're only going to be cared about based on how useful you are. A lot of people have forgotten about how difficult and how competitive it is as a man. We're always in constant competition with each other. All these people who talk about toxic masculinity and how bad it is for men to be traditionally masculine. A traditionally masculine man does things he doesn't feel like doing because it is his duty to do them.
The problem with Jamie, in my view, is that while he wanted to be respected in his identity as a man, the version of a man he'd been taught to emulate doesn't deserve respect. Treating women like you deserve them simply by virtue of claiming them like property, an unwillingness to see them as equals rather than subjects to be conquered, is actually extremely off-putting loser behavior. But Jamie was still, at the end of the day, a child. His actions were reprehensible, and there can't be any excuses for them. There can only be causes, influences taking advantage of the natural anxieties any young boy would feel. The solution is not just more isolated online content. It's as naive for the UK's Labour government to think screening episodes of Adolescence in schools will stop this problem, as for people to argue these problems will end if we simply stop demonising masculinity. Ironically, this is a point made in the show itself, demonstrating how rigid curriculums and lack of resources increasingly make students reliant on more passive, screen-based content. And you could definitely say there's an irony in this video also trying to be more educational online content when this dependence feeds exactly into the problem. I think back again to my own childhood, endlessly online, often stumbling obliviously into some of the most depraved, bigoted communities you could possibly imagine. That ultimately had about as much effect on my worldview as playing God of War did, because I had other influences. I had a parent I could talk to that stopped me circling the most bleak, black-pilled thoughts around in my head until engaging with that depravity felt like my only release. In the social media news cycle, nothing matters except splashy headlines, but there is no splashy headline for a simple, immediate solution to this issue. There are things that happen in the world that are outside of anyone's direct control. All we can do is listen and influence. So yeah, I'm looking forward to being a dad. Shout out to my granddad. He's a pretty cool guy. Now go watch my Wizard of Oz video. Please send money to financially support my child. Oh dear God, please help me. Babies need so many things. This is killing me. Yeah, it's funny the way I say father, isn't it? It's a very funny way. It sounds like father being, doesn't it? Would you prefer it if I were going, oh, I want to be a good father. I can't wait to be a great father figure. You like that?
Yeah. Worked out perfect.
I like to think so. I like to think it worked out okay.
A lot of these young men that are coming up now through the ranks, they're coming up and they don't have any role models. They don't have any role models. A lot of these young men don't even have any role models.